Should we talk about Mo Salah then? Because he posted, Lars, a sort of moderately pathetic picture of him all by himself in the gym with no comment. And I don't know. It's interesting. Like, I actually was far too sympathetic to him, I think, when it first happened. And sort of the days have gone on, I just thought it's just sort of, it's ridiculous to, and I'm team Carragher. I mean, it's been great for Jamie Carragher's career, if nothing else. Everyone is hanging on Carragher. I like Carragher, but I've never hung on his every word. And now you're just waiting to see what Jamie Carragher says on Monday Night Football. Oh, he's on CBS next. What's going to happen? But, Slot sort of said, I guess he could be in for the Brighton game. I imagine he would need to apologise. That doesn't seem like it's going to happen. But it's all just a bit sort of pathetic.
Watching the World Cup draw and this thing kind of made me think about how being the center of attention for too many years, being the focal point of everything, being in a position where people are like praising you and being nice to you constantly maybe warps your ego and your perception of the world around you a little bit. Because I do think it is slightly wild that benching a guy for 2.5 games, which is what's happened. Like, he's been dropped for 3 games, but he came on at halftime for one of them. So he's been benched for 2.5 games. And that has led him to go public saying someone's trying to get me out of the club and it is a completely disproportionate reaction from him to what's actually happened. If he'd been out for 10 games and the club was like actively briefing against him or something, then sure. But that isn't what's happened. What's happened is that a guy in his 30s who wasn't playing particularly well during a period where the team was really struggling has been sat down for the coach to try something else. And for him to push the nuclear button off the bones of that is wild. And there's the thing about, he mentioned that he's not getting support from the club. If I was part of the, upstairs guys who were debating whether or not to hand him a massive new contract or not in the spring, and who had to probably go to the owners and say, hey, this guy is old, but he's been really good for us and he's a club icon, so we're going to push the boat out and hand out a much bigger contract than we're actually comfortable with because we think that's the right thing to do. For him to turn around a few months later and say they're not supporting him, I was like, hang on, excuse me? Have you checked your bank account recently? So like, the whole situation is very unedifying. I secretly, privately think once you kind of talk yourself into handing him that massive contract and he starts this season not playing very well or not playing as well, then I think you immediately think, oh, okay, we've got 18 more months of this. And I wonder if he's almost solved that problem for them. I don't think we're quite in sort of Ronaldo United territory when he sort of actively made the team worse.
Imagine that as a team. Ronaldo United is not a team I'd necessarily want to.
But I don't think we're at the point where he's that big a problem. But I do think one of the things we've talked about in the, and this is going on a bit, in the great Liverpool form collapse discussion is that it seems like they've tried to replace Mo Salah when Mo Salah's already there and the team seems unbalanced. And maybe him moving on to Saudi Arabia in January is a thing that makes sense for everyone, including him, by the way, because then he can play the AFCON and then he can just kind of muck about and play football at a quite low intensity going into the World Cup, and he'll be like super ready physically and mentally for that, maybe. So maybe that's a good outcome for everyone.
Another Norwegian, Lars, Jan Åge Fjørtoft on ESPN was slightly lampooning this idea of Salah's that he's earned the right to be in the team all the time. He said, does that mean Kenny Dalglish can just get himself in the team whenever he feels like it? And it's the reality of football. You can be the best player ever, but when you're no longer producing at that level, there comes the point where you don't get to be in the team every week. And it feels like the beginning of the end, doesn't it? But you never know in football. Sometimes these stories do come back around.
I think it is the end. There was quite an interesting exchange on Amazon Prime's coverage last night after the game. Arne Slot came out to talk to the pundits, one of whom was Clarence Seedorf, and he didn't particularly. He knows he has to talk about Salah, and he knows that's all anyone wants to talk about. But he was very much trying to keep the focus on the players who were in Milan and who had won the game and performed well. And Seedorf was like a dog with a bone, wouldn't let him go. And Slot said, so you're a journalist now, Clarence. But Seedorf said, look, as the leader, is it not up to you to give the option or extend the olive branch? And Slot very much sort of said, well, should the initiative come from me or from him? And does he admit he made a mistake? So I think Slot is not interested in any kind of reconciliation with Salah. And if there is to be forgiveness, then Salah will have to come to him and grovel. And I can't see that happening.
What photo does he post? I mean, the one on his own in the gym is just so ludicrous, isn't it? It's just...
Especially with "You'll Never Walk Alone" very pointedly in the background.
I'm sure he knows that the writing's on the wall because of the way Liverpool have been playing this season, but particularly Salah. He's always been one of those players that his goal and assist return is the thing that's been so important to Liverpool. If that dries up, his general game for the team and the team structure hasn't always been to the team's benefit. So that's the manager's decision. The manager's own job and place at the club is dependent on the decision he makes and the players he picks. I've heard so many ex-pros be upset about this because when it comes down to it, every player probably inside wants to be able to say these things if they're not playing. Every player wants to come out and say, why isn't the manager playing me? Or I should be playing. Or I feel I'm better than that person. I think anybody in any organisation or any business. But it's just the nature of the beast. When you're under that umbrella, whoever you are in that chain, there has to be at some point, you can never be bigger than that organisation, however much you try. And just in humanity in general, it's either death or democracy that brings to an end people who try and court power and try to control it. I'm not putting Mohamed Salah into that, comparing him to any people of the past in that manner. Absolutely not. He is a fine footballer. But it definitely feels like, considering his form, he's lacking people who are behind him on this. If he was still scoring goals and performing well for the team, a lot of supporters would be behind him and there would be that matchup with him and the manager. But this is just football in general. Age always catches up with you, however good you are. Maybe Cristiano Ronaldo debates that. And you are always going to be in a position where at some point you're not going to be in the team. And you as a player have to decide, do I just move away graciously or where do I feel? And when the Sunderland game was the first time he'd been on the bench in successive games, and that is in his career at Liverpool. And so that in itself made you think, hold on, I'm not who I am at this club anymore, and I have to make a decision while my stock is still, as a star, high.
He does no favours for his teammates here, Barry. I mean, yesterday we were on the radio and I did have some sympathy because if you are on the bench and you're Mo Salah and you don't get on for a minute and your team don't win, you will just be fuming. But you made the point, and, since we chatted, it's so calculated that he only talks when he wants to make a statement. It isn't off the cuff, this, is it?
No, it's very calculated. I thought it was quite funny that in his post-match interview, Dominic Szoboszlai was talking about the absolute mess Liverpool find themselves in. He says, the only way we can get out of here is together. And then Mo just goes, hold my beer, Dominic. The fact of the matter is he has not been playing well enough to be in the Liverpool side. And I can understand why he might be sitting in the bench looking at other people on the pitch who are also not playing well enough to be in the Liverpool side. But there are more options when it comes to replacing him than there are, say, when it comes to replacing Ibrahima Konate, who's just a caricature of himself at this stage, or a caricature of the great defender he once was. Jamie Carragher has been relentlessly criticising Mo Salah for not coming out and speaking up in public. So he has now done that. I suspect this isn't exactly what Carragher had in mind when he was hoping he'd come out and speak up and take some responsibility. And I had a certain amount of sympathy for him yesterday, but the more I think about it, it's a very selfish act. Liverpool are already beset by assorted problems on the pitch, off the pitch, and he has just added to them.
Alonso's basically gone, which from the outside seems kind of mad.
Yeah, but it's Real Madrid, and it's the nature of it. And I think you've got to look slightly beyond the results to the mechanics within the dressing room, to the way that they're playing, to the level of performance, to the kind of tensions that you always get at Real Madrid. On Sunday night, after they were beaten by Celta de Vigo, and they weren't just beaten, they were pulled about the pitch by Celta de Vigo. It was really fascinating to watch, actually. There was a meeting at the Bernabeu long into the night. plenty of the people around the president feeling like maybe it's not a bad idea that he gets sacked. There was an inclination to do that then, but there was a decision to hold on, in part to kind of allow, I suppose, this game to be a sort of a judgment, if you like, upon them. And the difficult thing now is that this game is slightly inconclusive, because you can take a step back from this. And of course, this is what was happening partly last night, and say, well, this is against Manchester City, who are a very, very strong team. You lose 2-1 to a debatable penalty. It doesn't really matter whether it's debatable, but it wasn't so clear cut as to say, wow, you got absolutely battered. You hit the bar in the last minute going for a comeback. There was a bit of a reaction from the team. They've got 8 players missing through injury, and so you can create a kind of, if you like, a positive narrative around it. But it's still only now 2 wins in the last 8 games. They've got 2 more before Christmas. I think I'm right in saying they go away to Alaves this weekend and then play against Sevilla, plus a Copa del Rey game, which they really shouldn't lose, against third-tier team Talavera, which is about an hour south. And so there's a huge amount of pressure there. There's that pressure there because of all of those elements, and in particular, of course, because the fault lines are showing, and the fault lines are showing, and of course, it's always much, much easier, and particularly a club like Real Madrid, to replace a manager than replace players. I'm going to strip this down to the most simple thing imaginable, which is, if you like, the kind of the mindset that underpins this. And the most simple thing imaginable in terms of that mindset is, there's only one Vinicius, but there are loads of managers out there.
Right. And it is that simple. I mean, is it just about him? Because this idea, there's this sort of very oversimplified idea that, Real Madrid players they've got such massive egos that they just want to be given a ball and say, off you go, which is sort of debasing how good Ancelotti was, unless that's what he did, right?
I think it does debase Ancelotti, and I think it's kind of incumbent upon us, to not always go down that route. But there is a temptation to do that, and if you look at the managers that have been really successful over the last, I think you can go back almost 30 years, and you look at the managers that have been really successful, is that for the most part they've been managers with what's always known in Spanish as having a left hand. That ability to engage with the dressing room. There's a lovely phrase that Vicente del Bosque came up with once, which sums it up quite nicely, I think, which is, he said, in part, the secret is making the players think it was their idea. That you don't sort of impose upon them. You provide a framework through which they work. You give them a degree of freedom. Now, I think the problem is, of course, that leads to this idea that, it's the players are all lazy, they don't want to run around. And I think, obviously, they do want to run around. They do want to compete. They do want to do things. But there is that kind of element of freedom and self-status, as well as team status, and some of the things that you have to do. And of course, the big contradiction at the heart of this, or the big problem at the heart of this, is that Xabi Alonso was brought in precisely on this basis, that here's a systems coach. Here's a coach that will give them a structure, because we shouldn't forget that while Carlo Ancelotti was enormously successful, last year Real Madrid were absolutely disastrous. And it just fell apart. And so you get this natural thing, I suppose, of searching for the thing you haven't got. And so there's this idea, well, what Xabi Alonso will do will be bring structure. Imagine these players, but with a structure. Imagine how good it could be. But then you've got to encourage some of these players, or make some of these players do some of the things that it's not so much that they don't want to do it, because that makes it sound really simple. Like they've just gone, run around. Not doing that, but they don't naturally do that. It's not their natural inclination. That the pieces don't naturally fit together. I also think there's some holes in the squad. They don't have a midfield playmaker. They don't have Subimendi, who Xabi Alonso really, really wanted them to have.
Yeah, I suppose it's hard to make Vinicius or whoever, think. I don't know if Xabi Alonso likes inverting fullbacks. So this is your idea, like to make him come in one day and say, "Hey lads, I've got a great idea. Why don't we press on the B of the bang or whatever?" Is there a bit of a vacuum of leadership within the dressing room? If you think of, like, in the last few years of losing Ramos and Cruz and Modric, you'd imagine Modric was just like a great example in the dressing room. But like players that were of that level, that even if there was discontent within the ranks, it wouldn't bubble beyond a sort of certain level.
Even Cristiano Ronaldo. Now, Cristiano Ronaldo, obviously, a lot is often made of his kind of his sense of self-worth, and how much of it is about him. But you just use the word example. There's no better example than him in terms of professionalism, in terms of determination, in terms of a kind of a will to win and be really, really relentless about it. I think if you look in the dressing room now, you do sort of wonder about some of those personalities. Dani Carvajal is the really obvious example, but he's been injured a lot over the last year or so. You haven't got that, but I think leadership goes beyond just the personality. I think it's about the play as well. So with someone like Toni Kroos, you can give him the ball and you play from there, or he can take responsibility for leading to play. You look at Real Madrid, and this is a ridiculous thing in a way to say because it sounds dismissive of footballers who are very, very good. But let's say it. Where's the central midfielder? Where's the person who actually makes them play? There kind of isn't one that takes the responsibility to construct all that. Last night they ended up playing Dani Ceballos, and again with the risk of sounding dismissive of Ceballos, this is the one midfielder who's actually a bit of a kind of run the game kind of player, a bit of a keep the ball moving player, a bit of an impose a style on you type of player, and yet it's Dani Ceballos who they've tried with over many years and never quite ever felt like they were entirely convinced by. And so
whose fault is that?
Well.
Is that Alonso or is that Florentino Perez?
And that's
a
the
recruitment
hierarchy. That particular part of it, of course, is about hierarchy. It's about finance as well. And I think one of the things that we sometimes forget is that Real Madrid, although they do spend a lot of money, actually don't spend very much money. You look over the last few years, they've been really quite cautious with how much they've spent. There's been a handful of really big signings. This summer, in fact, in part, you could say, they signed big money on the kind of players they wouldn't normally do. Dean Howson and Alvaro Carreras cost a lot of money, and they're not the kind of players that Real Madrid would normally go for. But that central midfield piece, which Xabi Alonso would very much have liked to have been Martin Zubimendi, they didn't bring in.
So what happens now?
What happens now? I mean, that's exactly the question we were all asking ourselves last night. Last night, it feels like it slows things down a bit. It means that there isn't an imminent sacking in theory. The underlying things are still there. Now, I think part of this, of course, is about how you react and whether or not you can get. And Xabi Alonso said something last night. Now, obviously, this may well be wishful thinking, and of course, the decision isn't his. He says everything passes, everything goes. In the end, everything you get through everything, and I suppose there will be that sense from him of what if I can get the players to respond. And some of the players last night, were queuing up. Maybe they have to publicly to say that we're behind the manager. I thought Aurelien Tchouameni's pre-match press conference was very, very clear defence of the manager, and I thought actually a sincere one. It's our fault. We're the ones not doing some of these things. But then you have to ask yourself whether they ever really can with consistency, with the kind of players they've got, with the approach that some of those players have, with the structure that Xabi Alonso is trying to put in place. And also then again, that question about Xabi Alonso's ability or not to engage with those players, to seek empathy and connection with them and bring them on board. But last night you got players defending the manager. Last night you got a response at least for 20 minutes at the start or 25 minutes at the start and 20 minutes maybe at the end, and you got a sense that maybe there can be a reaction. The problem is, let's go back a week. So a week ago, Real Madrid go away to Athletic Club. They play really well. They win away at San Mamés, the stadium that's kind of the most mythologized in the whole of Spain, and everyone goes, "Oh, well, there you go. Something to build on." It's happened. They've fixed their problems. They've sought accommodation. They've got together. They've said, "Listen, we're all in this together. Even if there's been issues before, come on, we're all in the same boat." And they beat them. Everyone says, "This is great. Okay, this is the beginning, if you like, of things being calmed down." And they go back to the Bernabeu and they get absolutely battered by Celta.
First thing, when you talk about the left hand, I love the expression. Is that like the left hand of the conductor? Because you use the right hand to beat time, and you use the left hand to cajole the players. Because that could be an explanation.
I don't know why that is. Yeah. No, I'm glad you've thrown that up because actually that is quite a nice explanation.
So that's one thing. The second thing, I don't know if it's talked a lot about in Spain, but there was one moment yesterday which, for me, encapsulated what was wrong with that Real Madrid team. And I thought almost of it in sort of existential terms. On one hand, you had Manchester City, for all their brittleness and their youth, they were existing, they were the being, and Real Madrid were nothingness. It was like Jean-Paul Sartre, being in nothingness, and they were nothingness. And the best way to illustrate that, 59th minute, really promising situation. Vinicius gets the ball. Rodrigo has got about 20 yards of space on the right-hand side. And I'm there, and I'm almost screaming at the screen. And I'm thinking, he doesn't want to pass him the ball. He's going to hold on to the ball, and he did. And the result is that what was a clear-cut opportunity, Rodrigo, especially in the form that he was in that game, goes on would have beaten Donnarumma. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But he waited and waited and waited. And by the time he gave the pass, because he really had no other choice, it was too late. And I was wondering if people were talking about this as well, because for me, when I watched it, I thought, he doesn't want to pass the ball to him. There's a problem here. Paranoid conspiracy, typical Real Madrid.
No, I think
conspiracist.
there has been a lot of talk about players not wanting to seek out certain types of passes, but there's not been a huge amount of discussion about it specifically between Vinicius and Rodrigo.
Okay.
Rodrigo's barely played, by the way. When he scored last night, it was the first time he scored in 33 games, partly because he hasn't been playing many minutes in those games. And he was a player that in the summer the club were trying to move on because they thought there was a market for him. They didn't play him at all during the Club World Cup, in part to try and send him a message. But Xabi Alonso thought that he could be useful, but he really hasn't played. And he hasn't played in part, of course, because he would prefer to play on the left-hand side. I know he played on the right last night and he played very well there. And actually, I think it possibly is where he's best. But Vinicius, Mbappe, Rodrigo, even Bellingham to some extent, sort of drift all to the same side of the pitch. That's part of it as well. I think there is a distribution of space question. I also think there's a mechanical thing on that, and the possibility that it's not so much not wanting to play the passes. There just isn't kind of, if you like, a natural immediacy of seeing those passes, of knowing that this is the structure, this is where it goes. And I think that's actually quite important. There's a moment, and it's almost around about the time you're talking about in the second half and it would be around about the hour where Real Madrid are playing the ball around in midfield, and then it kind of goes back to the defence, and it comes around the back, and it goes back into midfield again, and they're looking to see if there's a ball forward, and it doesn't happen, so the ball comes back again. And the fans started whistling. And I think what we saw there was the frustration of a season in which everybody has seen that when Real Madrid can go up and run, and when a team offers them space to run behind, because you've got players as quick as an Mbappe, who admittedly didn't play yesterday, and Vinicius, you can go beyond people and run at people, which is what had happened in Bilbao. But when Real Madrid have been in a position in which they've had to construct an attack, they've had nothing this season. Genuinely nothing. There's a phrase that doesn't work particularly well in English, but the Spanish use all the time, which is Real Madrid don't play at anything. You know, there's no idea, there's no structure. What are they playing at? What is it that they are doing? And the answer for so much of the season has been nothing.
I like the idea of Jean-Paul Sartre ringing TalkSport. You know, Jean-Paul's online too. It's all about everything and nothingness, Brian. That's what it is. There were lots of tributes at the Valley to Norman Barker, 68-year-old who'd been going to Charlton since 1968, who was taken ill during the 13th minute of the game against Portsmouth on Saturday and passed away despite receiving medical treatment. He died in hospital later. He was known as Headphones Norm. He wore big over-ear headphones to the games. He'd been named Charlton's Supporter of the Year by manager Nathan Jones in July. In a tribute posted online, the club said it was devastated by the loss of one of its most loyal and recognisable faces. We had an email from Sam who said, I wanted to share the sad news of the passing of lifelong Charlton supporter Norman Barker. He was a season ticket holder for 35 years, a constant presence through every twist of the club's journey, from leaving the Valley to the emotional return home, from the heights of Premier League football to the tougher years in League One. Norman's loyalty never wavered. He represented the very best of what it means to be a football fan: devotion, resilience, and an unbreakable bond with his club. His loss will be deeply felt within the Charlton community. Thanks for taking a moment to acknowledge a supporter who truly lived and breathed the game. I think there's been such an outpouring from beyond Charlton, because we all know those fans, even if we don't know them, who are just always there. And not just that, I was thinking this was more a lower league thing, but I think, you know, Premier League fans will know this as well. Just the people who go all the time, there's some bloke who's there. He's always there in the same place, and actually they're the sort of constant. They are part of the sort of emotional fabric which makes you love going to football.
When I was going to Arsenal every week as a season ticket holder, which I don't get to do nowadays, but when you go every week, you do see people over and over again, and some of them you never speak to because maybe they're a few rows away. They're just people who you see going past you on the way to the rows. You recognise them in their seat. It feels like you know people who you don't know, and you recognise people you don't know. And sometimes you even see someone, you give them a little nod, you give them a hello, even though you've never shared words with them. And maybe once you'll end up in that scrum that happens after a goal, you'll end up hugging these people because you don't actually really even think about it when you're in those moments of joy at a football game, do you? So I think there is this very particular bond with football and football fans when you're all there for the same reason. You're all there to cheer the team together, and you just recognise people and feel a connection to people even without actually knowing them. And I think those the little details like the headphones become part of who that person is, and how people relate not just to not to them specifically, but to the experience of going to the ground and being at the game. And I think that all fans who go to the games every week like that become part of the tapestry. And yeah, it's I suppose he's just become this embodiment for lots of people of what that feeling is of connection to people who support your club with you.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, the bottom of the Championship looks very sort of 90s, early 2000s. Premier League, Portsmouth 22nd, Norwich 23rd, Sheffield Wednesday obviously bottom, -9 points. I was complaining on X about Cambridge letting in an equaliser at home to Chesterfield in the 92nd minute after dominating the game and just infuriated. Matt replied saying it could have been worse. Having not won in weeks, Wednesday conceded on 90+7 with 7 seconds left, having had possession of the ball with 14 seconds to go. It never rains, but it pours. They drew 1-1 with Watford. And we'll finish with this from Rustall FC in Step 5, the Southern Counties East Football League in Kent. They tweeted slight delay here to the restart due to a floodlight issue, and they sent a photo. This was from the weekend, but we didn't have time on Monday. There's a few people standing, just on the grass, some advertising hoardings. There's a ladder going up to the sort of fuse box or whatever it is, and at the top of the ladder is a guy wearing a number 9 shirt in full kit and his boots on. It's clearly the centre forward, who's a guy called Char Clover, who tweeted later, I did my best. Apparently 14 out of the 16 lights on wasn't enough for the restart. Shame being 2-0 up, but oh well, we go again. Yeah, they were 2 up, I think, against Corinthians. And he fixed most of the floodlights, but not enough. He is a qualified electrician. It is worth pointing that out.
14 out of 16 sounds pretty good. That seems harsh.
Good enough to me, doesn't it? But it's sort of like it epitomises non-league football, this picture, in such a beautiful way. Lars?
I think if we had 14 out of 16 lights in the house working, we could still podcast. So I'm saying.
True. They are different things, I guess. But yeah, we blame the ref.
I have 14 lights in my house.
There's a little part of me that wants everyone to count. How many they have, that feels like a different podcast to me. I have on the radio made listeners count all the plastic bags you have in that cupboard, and many have obliged. Can we start with this question from David Squires, our mate, who says, does Philippe know if there is any groundswell of dissent within FIFA regarding Gianni's alignment with Trump, or are most members just happy to count the cash? Is his question.
I don't know about the second part of the question. I couldn't possibly answer that. But for the first part of the question, yes, definitely. There have been grumblings, and there have been grumblings against Infantino within FIFA and within the FIFA Council and within the FIFA Congress, the 211 member associations which compose FIFA. Those of people think that they're being basically there's a ring has been put through their noses, and they're being led. They're the bulls. They're being led by Johnny Infantino to the market, whether they like it or not, and they don't know which sauce they're going to use to cook them with. And so they're not happy with that. Unfortunately, there is absolutely no indication that anybody is prepared to act. The only act of rebellion was, you might remember, at the last FIFA Congress when Johnny was late in arriving because he was too busy cavorting with President Trump, if I'm not mistaken. And actually, they were actually pissed off because they said, this is FIFA. You have to be there on time. We've been waiting for you. But that's about as far as it went. That's as far as it went. So there are some grumblings. There are some people who are not happy at all with the way things are being done. But through interest, self-interest, and fear and cowardice, nobody's doing anything for the time being.
Pablo says a World Cup final ticket is currently selling for $7,625, £5,700. Would anyone on the pod ever pay such a sum? I'll speak for myself. No, but the dynamic pricing and it's surged, Philippe, since we know which games are where and when.
Yeah, and actually, I think you could find there were some tickets which were up to 30,000. I think in first category. So the dynamic pricing is absolutely atrocious because the idea is that obviously if the demand is lower, the price are going to go down as well. Well, it's not going to happen, is it? Perhaps, unless, of course, everybody decides to stay home, which, given the measures which are being taken by the US government day after day. You've read about the last one, which is to, even if you come from the UK or France, you're going to have to give access to the last 5 years of your social media activity to the lovely people who are welcoming you at immigration. So I think that loads of people will like that. And so we'll see. Maybe the prices will tumble. We don't know.
Think you could be in trouble there, Max, with your liberal hand-wringing.
Well, as you know, as long as I just push them towards picture of Trevor Nelson's microwave. But it's a genuine question, Philippe. Like someone like me, who I have probably tweeted a bit about the Trump regime, not a huge amount, but like, am I at risk now? What happens if I go and they go through 5 years of my Instagram and Twitter?
Well, I think the thing is
They'll be very bored.
Refused entry.
Of course, they'll be bored. Sorry.
Do reverse parking. Surely they'd be interested in that one, mate.
Well, exactly, yeah. Well, when I park the Subaru, they'd be like, "Oh, actually, let this guy in."
Post of chili cooking live. Your live stream chili.
Okay, for the time being, this is only something which is being considered, but there are good reasons to think that it will be implemented. That's the first thing. It's not already in place. That's the first thing to be. The second thing, you could be refused entry. Given how much it's going to cost, because have you seen the price of the hotel rooms? My God. If you, imagine that you're following the Scotland team. And I say that because I know far more Scottish friends who are willing to go there to follow their team for obvious reasons than I know English friends who are willing to go and spend thousands to follow the Three Lions. But you could arrive having booked all those very expensive tickets and rooms and flights and everything, and be turned back at the border. That's a real risk. Now, will there be dispensations for people who have World Cup tickets? I don't know. This hasn't gone to that particular extent, but given the way things are going in America, to be honest, my advice to everybody is that don't fucking bother. Just stay at home. I mean, what's the point? And do you know anybody who's going? Unless they have to because of their job?
I'm currently making a business case as we speak. I won't put that in, Philippe.
Well, I mean, I have suggested we're going to be on the West Coast. I have suggested Acapulco. That's where I want to be.
Go to Mexico and
I don't know if the bosses are listening. Michael says, will the pod be taking 2 scheduled drinks breaks from now on? Yeah, so FIFA says it'll include 3-minute hydration breaks in each half of every game, not just those players in hot weather. FIFA says these breaks are for player welfare. Well, I guess, obviously everyone's going, well, there'll be adverts. And I think, Barry, I remember being so furious about adverts at the end of overs in cricket, and now I'm not that fussed. So I don't see this as the end of the world. I'd rather it didn't happen, but I won't lose sleep over it when I'm in a cell because they didn't like me tweeting a picture of a cherry tomato on the floor and asking if you lost your tomato in EC1. But anyway, what do you think of drinks breaks?
But yeah, it's clearly a cynical move to allow more adverts. It would be very low down my list of things to be annoyed about at the forthcoming World Cup.
I mean, it's definitely not the most annoying thing about the next year's World Cup, but I do think it will be annoying. You will get teams, I imagine, from about 16, 17 minutes onwards, almost playing for the water break. If you're the outsider, you're the underdog, you almost want to get to that point, and I think it can slow the game down. It can stop the rhythm, and sort of as teams are trying to build attack after attack. That's kind of how you break down that type of team that's got everybody strung across the defences. Just keep building attacks. And I also feel sorry for if I don't end up in the US with watching Iran v New Zealand with a 2 a.m. kickoff that's guaranteed to be 0-0, and I've really feel like I'll fall asleep on one of those water breaks. If not the first, then definitely the second.